And in the 70s, all of our dads wore suits to work, but they wore what was the most unfortunate style ever known to mankind, and they were called leisure suits. Anybody remember leisure suits? Oh, they were made out of some sort of thick polyester, a lot of times thick and ribbed, and they had big wide lapels, and top stitching was all the thing, and the big long, kind of side whiskers. And so that's what our dads all wore every week, every day to the office with their ties. And there was Phil Comer, 6'2". I come from a family of short men, 6'2" in a white, kind of cream-colored, three-piece Nino Cerruti suit. I just thought, the perfect man. There he is. For 3 years, I just was smitten, never spoke a word to him. In the 3 years, he was there, that guy on the stage. All my friends talked to him. Everybody in the church knew him. He was quite the catch. I'm sure every girl in the church was madly in love with him, and I knew I absolutely had no chance, so I would just watch the man from afar. Now, I had heard just bits and snatches of his story, and that his story just pulled me in even closer. He was a drummer in a rock band. Well, hey, right there, a drummer in a rock band. But it was a bad boy story a little bit, just enough. And, we all love those redeeming stories, how, that he's going to just give all the credit to his life for turning a bad boy good by just hooking up with us. And how many of us have fallen for that story? And many of you regret that story, but he was just bad enough to be, really intriguing. By the time I was 18 and graduated from high school, I was full-on infatuated. I just had one of those crushes that is just constant, and it just betrays you at the worst times. And now you have to understand, I'd never had a conversation with Phil, but I knew he was just perfect. I just could tell that he was just perfect. But all good love stories have to have conflict, right? It's a bummer. I wish it wasn't true, but it is true. And we had conflict. We had a problem. My problem was that my very best friend, she was my very best friend, she also thought that Phil was perfect for her. I'm so glad those years are over, aren't you? There is, we talk about pressure and we talk about stress, but there is nothing like the stress of those high school, early college years. So, being the quiet, sweet, compliant, maybe passive-aggressive woman that I am, I conceded defeat. Before he even knew that we had set our sights on him, I conceded defeat. And I just, I look back now and think what our men don't know about this race of Eve that we are a part of just won't hurt them. So we don't tell these stories outside our circles. All this thing conniving going on behind our backs. So I told Gail, my best friend, you just go for it. I will bow out. I'm just going to let you have him. Now, keep in mind, he hadn't so much as hinted that he had the least bit of interest in either one of us. And this was the 70s. And girls did not chase boys in the 70s. We weren't supposed to be the initiators. And so, no, we waited to be pursued. Now, what they didn't know, behind the scenes, we were setting it up to ensure that particular one would pursue us, right? We all know the secrets of this. As my mother used to advise me, blatantly, run, die, you just run fast enough to get caught. Okay, I had that down to a science, so I thought I was so gallant to give way to Gail. What a great friend I was. Friendship means more to me than some guy. So absolutely, I give way to you. Until one Sunday night after church, my best friend Gail and I and our college pastor, we were in college by now, Tim and me, we all went out to eat at Bob's Big Boys on Camden Avenue in San Jose after church. And we were sitting there and we were talking and we were eating, and in walks Phil Comer. And my heart just starts doing this, hyperventilating thing, boom, 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 boom. And I'm sitting at the end of the table, those booths of 4. So I'm in the end, and my best friend is next to me up against the wall, so she's stuck. And across from us is Tim, and he was just a friend, so we were just talking to him. And Phil just happens to be escorted, he and this other guy he was with, he was giving him some counsel too, right across from us, a table for 2. So we had table for 4, table for 2, kind of place almost like Red Robin. And Phil sits right here, and I'm sitting right here. And I tried to ignore him. I really, really tried. You've got to believe me. But he would not stop looking in my direction. And I couldn't stop looking in his direction. It was like a magnet, so embarrassing, but sort of fun and exhilarating all at the same time. I could no more have ignored Phil Comer in that moment than Santa Claus. I could just feel the steam coming off my best friend, Gail, though. Just feel it just starting to heat up the room. Well, we all just happened to finish our food at the same time, and we just happened to all stand up at the same time, and we just happened to all walk out to the nice, dark, secluded parking lot all at the same time, and it wasn't my fault. I'm telling you, it really wasn't my fault. And Phil followed me to my bright yellow VW Bug back then, and he asked me out. Now, in that moment, it did not even cross my mind to tell him to ask Gail instead of me. That did not bode well for my friendship with Gail. And sure enough, we fell in love, and a little over a year later, we were married. I was 19 years old. Now, I don't really recommend that. Wish I'd grown up a little bit and entered marriage a little bit less embarrassingly, emotionally immature, but there it is. I went into our wedding night beautifully innocent, saved by God, so thankful, innocent and eager and just a little bit scared. And our honeymoon was in Carmel, California. We still love to go back there. 2 weeks, we had 14 days, 2 weeks of knowing and of being known and being discovered. I remember thinking on that first day back to church, I just must look different than I looked 2 weeks ago. Certainly, I have to look different because intimacy changes us, doesn't it? We just look different. And I'm not talking just about sex. I'm talking about, yes, sexual intimacy, but soul intimacy, more than anything else, just does something. It just almost like unlocks a door and frees us to just blossom and be who we are. The way I love when Phil marries a couple and they come back from their honeymoon, I love to see the change in the bride when she comes back. Because just in that, whatever it was, a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, she just begins to glow in a radiant and beautiful way. Now, a friend of mine had 7 children, actually eventually had 8, but the story takes place, 7 kids, and when it was time to tell her oldest son, whose name was Matthew, all about, the birds and the bees, and time to start talking about that stuff, his mom and dad were both present. And he turned to his dad with a look of revulsion on his face and said, "You mean to tell me you and Mom did that 7 times?" Tonight, I want to talk to you about coming to God to listen. That's really what we're talking about. But to listen in his word, to read the Bible, not as a theorist, the way we're thinking, this is what I believe, and that's what I believe, and this is my theory on this and that. Not as an intellectual, not even as a theologian, not even as a mom. So many years I've read the scriptures as a mom wanting to bone up on wisdom and pass on to my kids, not even as that, but as a lover, intimacy. Because there is a satisfaction that comes in intimacy with God that every one of us in this room is longing for. And we think We're going to get that intimacy because we get a tiny taste of it if we marry a really good man. I married a really good man. So I have a taste of what that intimacy is about. But I want to talk to you about finding that intimacy with God in such a way that you are honestly satisfied. And to do that, I want to talk to you about coming to this word, coming to God's word, coming to listen to God as a lover. Now, if that kind of makes you a little bit uncomfortable, it really did me when I first started kind of delving into this years ago. Let's turn, though, to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, and it's the section on marriage that we all know about and have heard many of a good marriage sermon on. It's really, let me explain what this is about. This passage is really Paul's instructions, God's instructions to husbands, how husbands should treat their wives, how wives should treat their husbands in a whole new paradigm of doing marriage in the day. This was about doing marriage the kingdom way. Really, it was about marriage for the sake of intimacy, starting in Genesis 2, where God brought Eve to Adam, and the two became one flesh, one in every way. And that was the goal of marriage, was this oneness, this real intimacy. It was revolutionary in a world for which marriage was more of a necessity. Women had to get married or there would be nobody to support them. Men needed to get married in order to have kids, to be able to work the profession or whatever. It was such a different world that we're in today. And we've all heard marriage sermons from this passage, but for just a moment, I want you to take off your hat that says this is about marriage. And I want you to put on a different hat or sink your soul into these words as a metaphor. Because that's what they are, a metaphor of intimacy with God between a husband and wife, between God and us. Us individually, me, myself, him the way God sees me, and us as a people, as a church. Because God doesn't just see us as a bunch of individuals in this room. He sees us as a church. His bride is actually the church. We're just part of that. So if you go down to verse 25 in Ephesians chapter 5, we know all this and we love this. You husbands must love your wives with the same love Christ showed the church. How was that? What was that kind of love? Goes on, he gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by baptism and God's word. Why? Verse 27, he did this to present her without spot or wrinkle or any other blemish, to make her beautiful, to make the church beautiful, to make you beautiful. And in verse 32, this is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. In some mysterious way, marriage is a metaphor for this intimacy that God desires between him and us as a people. Not as a theory, God loves me, but as reality. God is in love with me. And this is how I think David, who wrote most of the Psalms, read the scriptures. As a songwriter, yes, but more than anything else, he read the scriptures. He put his nose in the stories as a lover of God, which is why when he wrote Psalm 25:14, a song, in the New Living, it says, friendship or intimacy with the Lord is reserved for those who fear him. I love this phrase. With them, he shares the secrets of his covenant. What is fear? It's to be in awe of him. I mean, enraptured, like I was with Phil Comer, just like in awe of the man. That's really what fear of God means, to actually be enraptured and enamored and caught up in wonder at God as our lover. Years ago, I read a biography of Lilias Trotter. Have any of you ever heard of Lilias Trotter? Okay, she was just an obscure book somebody gave me. In 1888, she left London, where she was part of a really comfortable upper middle class upbringing, to venture on her own without any any form of support to a rough, primitive Arabian world of Algeria, Northern Africa. As I was reading her story, it dawned on me that Lilias Trotter knew God in a way that I didn't. And every time I'd read her words, reading through, she kept extensive diaries, so her biography was giving her actual words. I was reading it thinking, there's something Lilias Trotter understood that I'm yet to grasp. And so I wanted to know why. What is it? What is this? So I went and searched for a key. And do you know what I found as I read through her story and read her diary pages? She quotes from the Song of Solomon in the Bible over and over and over again. Finally, near the back of the book was how she talked about this was the favorite book in all of the Bible. Well, I was kind of fascinated because, you read the Song of Solomon, and it is, okay? It's not like Puritan England, New England. It's not Victorian England. It's just right out there. So how does a spinster, an unmarried Victorian England woman, find the Song of Solomon to be her favorite book in the Bible? Well, we do know, because we're really well taught in this church, and we're so thankful for that. The Song of Solomon is not meant to be an allegory. So you can't take this too far, because it actually is really a series of poems or songs between two lovers. So God sticks right almost smack dab in the middle of our Bibles, really basically beautiful pictures of actual, intimate, beautiful, alluring love between two people. Was Lilias, as she was reading this, was she just some sort of a overly active imagination romanticist? Was she just all washed up in the way she was reading the scripture? I don't think so. I think she took Ephesians chapter 5 and a whole bunch of the Psalms where David is just talking so directly to God. And I think she took the Song of Psalms and she read the Bible from the perspective of a lover of God, a seeker after him. And I think God met Lilias Trotter there, and he satisfied that part of her that would actually never know a husband. She was never fell in love, never found a man who shared her passion for these people who seemed so lost in northern Algeria. He gave her a love so rich and so much better than any man could actually ever give her. She knew God as her lover. And I mean that in the most respectful sense, in a capital L kind of a sense of God. She read these words that are in this book, and she looked out at creation. She was an incredible artist, growing and growing in fame. There are still books of her beautiful, mostly watercolors and a few sketches. And she looked out at creation, and she listened, and she heard the one she quoted all the time in her biography, "Him whom my soul loves," which is a quote out of Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, chapter 3, verse 2, where it says, "I will search for the one my soul loves." Lilias searched for God. She found him, she heard him, she fell in love with him, and every picture she drew or painted and every word that she wrote is just dripping with a woman in love with God. So I finished the book about her, and I set it down, and I sat for a while in my own yearning to know my God, to know God as my lover. Like, did I really want this? Or did this just feel a little bit too scary and too strange to me? I decided I really did. I thought, I really want to understand that part of God. So I decided to do what I've come to call as doing a Jacob. And if you read chapter 6 and 7 this week, you read a lot about Jacob and why it took me so long to figure out why God seems so proud of Jacob because he really messes his life up. He is just so deceiving and manipulative and dishonest. And God loved him. He calls himself the God of Jacob time after time after time in the scriptures. And the only conclusion that I think makes sense to me, than reading all the people who know more than I do, is that Jacob just had this tenacious way of going after God and saying, I will not let go until you bless me. So for me, when I'm doing a Jacob, I'm going to go after God until he blesses me. So I decided that I would read the Song of Psalms over and over and over again every day, all summer long. It was right at the beginning of summer, until I could be able to see what it was that Lilias Trotter heard in the Song of Solomon. So I did. Day 1, 8 chapters, takes about 25-30 minutes to read it, nothing. Day 2, I thought this is really a great book, but nothing. Day after day after day, I sat reading the Song of Songs over and over and over again, having no clue how Lilias Trotter had come to know God as a lover. Until finally, one morning, I was reading on the back deck, and the morning was one of those sweet, cool mornings when you know it's going to be hot later, and there was a breeze just fluttering through the pages of my Bible, and suddenly, I got it. Suddenly, I just heard it. I read in chapter 2, verse 3, and this phrase, I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. And all of a sudden, I could just see myself. My grandfather had an apple orchard in eastern Oregon. He was an apple farmer. I could just see myself sitting in the shade of the old gnarled apple tree, and it was just heavy with sweet, crisp, juicy apples, and I'm smiling, and I'm resting, and juice is just coming down my chin, and it dawned on me, that's it. It's about delight. Lilias Trotter discovered her delight, that feeling of rest, that feeling of just fun and joy and happiness, and I'm in my sweet spot. She found that in God. Now, before that, I had maybe seen God as my Lord, as my master, as my teacher. Sometimes, a few times, maybe a little bit, I'd felt him as my comforter. But that morning, I began to see a whole new dimension of God as my lover. And it's exactly what Paul prayed for the people he loved in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 19. And you know what? This is a verse, and there's a whole lot more to the prayer than just this one that I will read, that I have just prayed and prayed and prayed over my children. Because I want to see my children not only be good men and women, not only did I want them to fall in love and meet good men and women to do life with, I wanted to see my kids experience God in a way that was so vibrant and so real, something I couldn't force on them or make happen in their lives, that no matter what life would bring them, they would go to him instead of away from him. This is what Paul prayed. May you experience, this is New Living, Ephesians 3, verse 19. May you experience the love of Christ. Though it is so great, you will never fully understand it, because then you will be filled with the fullness or the satisfaction, the fullness of life and power that comes from God. Fullness of life, what is that except for that feeling of satisfaction? Everything changes when we listen to God as our lover. If you read in chapter 7 in my story about me getting stuck in LAX and nearly panicking because I could not figure out what in the world was going on. I had gone down to visit my girls, and they dropped me off at the airport, and I learned a couple of hours, well, actually not until the next day, what had happened. The whole airport was shut down because there was a satellite flew just a little bit too low and it alerted the navigation systems, and so all flights, except for maybe just a couple that were almost on the runway, were allowed out. But I had no idea with just this cochlear on, it's not always very discriminating about sound. So the more sound there is, it's a computer, the more distorted sound gets. So all I could hear is all of a sudden the airport was so loud. I had no idea what was going on. And I looked over at one of those boards, that does departures and arrivals. And every single departure and arrival and flight is blinking, 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 blinking on it. So I could see that no planes were landing, and hardly anybody's plane was going out. But I tried to talk to a couple of people what's going on, but they talked to me in normal way, and with all that noise, I couldn't hear them. So what I didn't write in the book is that very morning, because normally I text on my phone all the time. It's wonderful for a person like me. That very morning, as I was getting ready to go to the airport, I had dropped my phone in some water, and they don't like water very much, so my phone wasn't working. But I really didn't want to say that in the book because the water I dropped it in was the toilet. You really don't want that in print all the time. So here's my phone not working for me. Everything's going crazy. I can't hear a thing. I don't know what's going on. My imagination is going wild. I'm sure it's terrorists. I mean, I'm in LAX. If I was a terrorist, that's probably where I would go. And I'm looking at the board, and I'm crying out to God as my lover about the one who honestly cares about what is concerning and scaring me. I'm saying, God, what do I do? Help me. What do I do? And I literally turn around like this and smash right into a person. And I immediately reach down, because she's smaller than me, and start to say, oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. And it's Adeline. Adeline, are you here? She's okay, she was moving. Do you see Adeline anywhere? You're not here. Okay, so Adeline, I know Adeline. So here I'm in LAX with hundreds of thousands of people all stranded, and there is this woman, and I know her. She goes to our church. And she might not be here because I think this week is the week that she and her husband are moved. She's Indonesian. Her husband works for Nike, and they were being transferred to China. So I run into Adeline, who's crying because as soon as she saw me, because you know how grief sits right under the surface, and she had just buried her mom. So she's come back from Indonesia after burying her mom. I'm the first friend that she sees. She starts crying. I start bawling because, it's like, I just prayed, God, please help me. I don't know what to do. And I run immediately into Adeline. Adeline is this very proper, reserved Indonesian woman who would not be rude if her life depended on it, or if mine kind of did. She takes me bullies her way to the front of a line that's got like 200 people in it. And they're all looking at her, and I'm just looking like I'm just with her. And she gets in the person's face, and she says, this is my friend. She needs on a flight. She's deaf. She can't hardly hear. You need to take care of her. And that person just practically saluted her at the moment, okay? And she knew how to get in my face so I could really hear. And she's talking to me, and we're writing things down. And she called my daughter, Rebecca, and said, come back to the airport. Your mom can't get out on a flight tonight. That's what it's like to be loved. Who but God could have arranged something like that in my life? You know, I want to tell that story to my kids and my grandkids. Everybody's telling me, Grandma, you told that story about 300 times already. Because that is what I'm talking about when I see God as my lover, not just my Lord, not just my master, but the one who loves me enough to send Adeline careening into me at just the right moment, to experience the love of Christ. Now, a lot of times when we experience the love of Christ, we experience in your skin, in each other's skin. Adeline came in skin to help me, not in just a sort of a theory. So I want to talk to you, just so that this just isn't all this sort of vague idea. I want to give you 6 ways that I believe we can experience the love of God. 6 ways to know him as lover, but even more, 6 ways as Paul is prayed for us and for his people that we would experience the love of God. And these 6 ways are so normal and so basic, but I feel like if we don't write sometimes the most normal and basic things down, we just don't actually remember to do them. So, number 1, invite him. Revelations 3:20, Jesus is saying, he says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." He waits to be wanted. And we hear this verse used all the time by evangelists, and it's beautiful. It's a great illustration. But in the context that this verse was written, it was just talking to us in the church, real people. That you and I, he's actually standing all the time, not a one-time deal, but every day, waiting to be wanted. Do you want me today, Diane, or have you got this? You think you can just navigate life without me? Because if you want me, I'm right here. He waits to be invited into your quiet spaces. Instead of just going on and on and on in your head, he waits to be invited. Will you be part of my day? Will you be part of this conversation? Will you go with me? Number 2, notice him. First of all, you invite him. Second of all, we train ourselves to notice him. In Song of Songs, Chapter 5, verse 2, the one who is the woman in the Song of Songs is saying, so she would kind of represent us, "I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking." He's saying, "Open to me, my beloved." I would just ask, is your heart awake to God all day, every day? I think we begin to train ourselves to be, even when we're doing something else, even when we're asleep, to be awake to God, even when we're busy doing life, to be awake to God. Do you go into the scriptures every day intent to find him, to notice God? Do you go into the scriptures with a pen and a piece of paper or a journal nearby, expecting to hear something from him, expecting to be able to write something down? Do you wake up in the morning and think, "Good morning, God. Are you here? Where is he?" One of the best ways that I have found for myself to notice God is through his names. And if you've been to any of our night in prayers, we talk a lot about the names of God and how those names really describe a facet of who he is. And for me personally, the names of God have been the richest way for me to experience him, to notice him in everyday life, to take him out of theory and into my life. If you go onto my blog and you go into archives, there's one whole section on the names of God. And that's just me going on and telling stories about how his name, the aspect of who he is, became personal for me. But those are the kind of things that help us get into the habit of noticing him, like a bride coming home from her honeymoon. Because a whole new thing has happened and we're noticing a whole nother person. Number 3, make time for him. We all know that back in the dating world, when someone says, I'm sorry, I just don't have time for a relationship right now. Well, we all know that what he or she really means is that they're really not that into you. And so they're just not going to move life around in order to have a relationship with you. It's just a really nice letdown, right? That is why I love the question that God throws out in Jeremiah 30:21. I said it a couple weeks ago. Just love this. Who is he or who is she who will devote herself to be close to me? We make time for him because we want to be the person who devotes herself to be close to him. And you know, there's never time. You think when you have young kids that you're going to have more time. There's never time. And I'm really hoping that as you gather together in your groups, that this will be a little bit of a different group session because I have a long list of questions for you. But that one of the things you'll do is get creative, thinking creatively together about how to actually make time for him. I'm at a stage in my life where actually making time for God is relatively easy, okay? But I struggled through just like the rest of you when I had young kids, and then you have teenagers, and then you have work. And how do you actually devote yourself to be close to him? I hope that in your groups that you'll get really creative. It doesn't look one way. And you get enough women talking together, and you're going to be able to get some strategies to figure out how to make it a reality. So you're not one of those who's saying, well, you know what? When my kids go to school, when the baby sleeps through the night, when this job, I get to retire from that job, then I will devote myself to be close to him. Because we want to if he's to be your lover, you have to make time for him. You know, I never had to prioritize Phil when we were dating. I would have forget sleep. I would have spent every second I could with him. I had to prioritize other things on purpose so that I could get some homework done and some things like that. Number 4. So what have we got so far? We've got invite him, notice him, make time for him. And number 4, believe him. I think a lot of us are really hard to love because we just cannot let ourselves believe that we're beautiful. That just as we are, that we're beautiful. I'm not just talking about how you look. I'm talking about you as a whole package. And that makes us hard to love. That sometimes make us prickly and defensive and closed off. Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 9 says, this is God talking, or this is the male talking to the female lover, okay? So like a husband to his wife, my dove, my perfect one, is unique. And I remember that summer when I was reading through it over and over and over again, just getting stopped at that word unique. Because isn't that what all of us want? It's certainly what I want. I want to be considered to be loved for all my uniqueness. Because it's exhausting to work and try and fit yourself into somebody else's mold. And you have to be just like that, right? But that isn't our relationship with God. That he views us as perfect, just as we are, as unique. Do you believe him? Do you believe what he says about you? Will you let yourself believe? Because you're not going to know him as a lover until you are willing to let him love you in that way, until you're willing to believe him. Number 5, simply love him. When Phil was pursuing me, nothing would have happened if I hadn't loved him in return. In fact, you want to know what he told me? He told me that if I had said no to that first date, that he would have never asked me on another date again. Isn't that horrible? I mean, I had a life, you know. I did a ton of babysitting on the weekends. What if I had actually a reason that I couldn't go? I think that's lame. Do you girls think that's lame? Yes. Okay, you need to tell your sons that's lame. You don't want to do that. Come on, you could fight a little harder than that. We learn how to love each other. We learn how our husbands or the one we love wants to be loved. We learn how he responds to the way that we love. We learn it as mothers with children. We love our children we express our love in such different ways to our children. We study each other's likes. We know each other's dislikes. We want to please him as our lover. In John 14:15, he says, if you love me, this is Jesus talking, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I'm sure you've read by now in my story how I had turned that into I'm going to show everybody how much I love God by being so good that I do everything that I'm supposed to do. Well, that's not what he's saying. What he's really saying is if you really love me, just without even knowing it's happening, you will start to do anything I ask of you. You will start to love the way I ask you, to respond the way I ask you, to repent of your old ways, because you know that isn't lining up with the God who loves you. If you love me, you will keep his commandments. It just happens. Number 6, pursue him. You love him and you pursue him. One of my favorite books is The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. In it, he writes about a people who, and these are his words, a people who are athirst for God, and they will not be satisfied till they have drunk deep at the fountain of the living water. They desire God above all. They are athirst to taste for themselves the piercing sweetness of the love of Christ.